Call the November 20th, 2023 regular meeting of the Union County Board of Commissioners to order. At this time, I would like to recognize Commissioner Brian Helms for our invocation.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. If you're so inclined, please bow your head in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we want to thank you, Lord, for all of your blessings on our county, on our state, and on our nation. Lord, as we begin this meeting tonight, we ask for your wisdom and your guidance for this board so that we make the best decisions possible for the people of our county. Lord, as we approach Thanksgiving this week, Lord, my prayer is that you remind us all what the true meaning of Thanksgiving is. Lord, it's more than just turkey and dressing, but Lord, it's giving thanks for all of your blessings upon us. For it's in Jesus' name we do pray. Amen.
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The next item on the agenda is informal comments from the community. We have one person that has signed up to speak for informal comments. Each speaker must address the board from the lectern and begin their remarks by giving their name, stating whether they are a resident of Union County, indicating the municipality within which they reside, if any. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to make remarks. A tone will sound at the conclusion of your remarks. A speaker may not yield his or her time to another speaker. Speakers may not discuss matters which are the subject of public hearings, and they must be courteous in their language and presentation. Restatements or repetitive comments by the same speaker, whether at the same or separate meetings, may be ruled out of order and terminated by the chair. Personal attacks will not be tolerated, and speakers may leave their written comments and/or supporting documents, if any, with the clerk to the board. Our speaker tonight is Edwin Elam.
Edwin Elam, town of Waxhaw. To the vice chair, to the commissioners, to Ms. West, to the county manager, to the attorney, to each and every person here tonight, and above all, the citizens. There is a time-honored code and public policy that all 14 municipalities' elected officials do not speak after informal comments of citizens at public meetings. The tradition and condition of elected officials refraining from speaking after any informal comments at public meetings serves a few intelligent purposes. First, it ensures that we, the people, the citizens of Union County, have the opportunity to express our views without bias, interruptions, or influence from some of you who have biased ideologies. This practice promotes open dialogue and allows all constituents to be heard. Secondly, it helps to maintain a level playing field. When the officials respond immediately, like you did on November the 6th from this very dais on a bad policy that was brought to your attention, it creates an imbalance in the public discussion, and it has, with some citizens, it overshadows, and sometimes they are hesitant to express their dissenting opinions, but not me. I know our rights as citizens, and I speak to the issues that will help all citizens fairly and equally. Some on this board are leaving a legacy of hijacking the public debate, previously reserved for terrorists. Every citizen deserves better, but they don't know how to, or they don't know how bad it really is. Lastly, by holding off on immediate responses, you, the officials, can take the time to reflect on thoughtful comments and gather more information before providing a less than informed response. It's a way to foster a more considerate, deliberate decision-making process. But that is not what a small sliver of our community is doing. We would prefer if you and others would absolutely have nothing to say after our informal comments and time, and stop abusing the people and municipalities by spreading evil. Thank you.
The next item is consideration of the consent agenda. Are there any revisions requested to the consent agenda?
Madam Vice Chair? Yes, if you wouldn't mind requesting that the board consider removing into a later meeting 23768, the county detention medical plan. Need to be some changes made to that.
I'll make a motion to approve the revised consent agenda, removing 23-768 for a later meeting. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are now at the business portion of the agenda. The next item on the agenda is item 23-761, capital planning and debt overview. I will now recognize Beverly Lyles, our Finance Director, for discussion of this item.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Vice Chair, Commissioners, and Management Team. As you all may recall, during the 2024 budget process, we presented you the county capital needs to start our long-term capital planning process for the next 5 years for county facilities, public safety needs, and IT-related capital projects. During that presentation, you were also presented with information on the National Government Finance Officers Association's best practices for capital planning, which includes that local government boards would adopt a long-term, multi-year capital plan and a financial plan to go along with that. During that process, we made you aware that our next steps would be to bring back to you information for the board for capital and financing recommendations for the next 5 years, for not only county needs, but also Union County Public Schools needs and South Piedmont Community College, which is our education partners. We have been working closely with the staff at Union County Public Schools and South Piedmont to receive their updated, adopted, long-term educational capital needs for fiscal year 2025 through 2030. Our next steps in this process will be to plan joint board workshops with both of your education partners. We are looking to do that throughout the fiscal year 25 budget process in the January timeframe, so we'll be able to get that started earlier in the process in the event that there will be bond referendum requests in the spring. Prior to leading up to those joint workshops, we wanted to put together an educational, informational session tonight for you, so you can have this information for you to look over for the next couple of months as we lead up to those for you to make decisions on the long-term capital plan. So tonight, we're going to provide you information on how the county currently compares to our peers from a credit rating overview perspective in the market, our current outstanding tax-supported debt. Please note, this does not include any water or sewer debt. This is only debt related to that being supported by our property tax rates. We also want you to look at our current debt capacity and what our current debt affordability is with the current revenue sources that are available today that we could utilize for capital needs. We also want you to be informed about what our capital funding options are and how we access the market for our long-term capital plan and the different types of credit options that are available for different types of projects. So in order to put all this information together, the county's management team and myself have been working in conjunction with our financial advisor, Mitch Baruglio with Davenport. Mitch is with us tonight. He's going to take you through this information. There is a lot of information in here for you. So please take this with you after tonight and make sure you look through it. If there's any questions you have as he goes through the process, please feel free to ask information. We want to make sure you understand the information being presented to you tonight. So, Mitch, if you will please join us and walk us through this presentation.
Great. Thanks, Beverly. Madam Vice Chair, members of the board, thank y'all for having me this evening. As Beverly mentioned, there's a lot of information in here. It's a thick book. A lot of it's in the appendix. There's 22 pages in the base of the presentation that we'll walk through this evening. Understanding y'all have a busy agenda, we'll try to move through it quickly, but feel free to, if it's okay with you, Madam Vice Chair, keep it conversational. Feel free to interrupt me if you have questions along the way. And I'll move through this at a fairly decent clip, so if you want me to slow down, have questions, stop me along the way, please feel free. But we wanted to start out, as Beverly mentioned, with just high-level, big picture on your credit rating. The county is rated AAA, and that's the highest you could be rated as a local government. And the credit rating is, we think about it in our own personal finances. I know many of you are aware. It's like if we go to get an auto loan or a home loan, the banks are going to pull our credit score, and that's a number. Well, in our municipal world, a credit rating is the same type of analysis, but it's a alphanumerical rating. So AAA is the highest you can be, followed by AA, single A, and thereafter. You all are rated, your county government is rated AAA, and that's the highest it can possibly be rated. You're starting from a very good spot in terms of that. If you ever wanted to access the capital markets, meaning if you ever wanted to borrow money to fund a capital project, you could do so at attractive rates, and your credit rating gives us confidence that we would be able to put a loan in place at very attractive market rates at the time. So that's something as part of this capital planning process that we want to keep an eye on and understand how do decisions that are made during the capital planning process, how could that impact your credit rating? Not to say the decisions you make should only be tied to maintaining that credit rating, but we do want you to have the information to know how decisions that are made as part of the capital funding process could impact that rating and factor that into the decision-making process. In order to provide a little bit of perspective on that along the way, we've pulled a series of peer comparatives, and we're going to look at other rated counties, other counties with credit ratings, and we're going to use Moody's Investor Service as our baseline for that. We subscribe to a database with Moody's Investor Service that we're able to pull down all of the same data that the rating analysts themselves are looking at. So all the data included here in some of these peer comparisons are directly from the rating agencies, consistent with the data that they're looking at. And we're going to compare you to other AAA rated counties, AA1 rated counties, which is one notch below you, and AA2 rated counties, which is 2 notches below your current rating. And to give you a little bit of perspective on that, on the right-hand side of the page, you can see the rating categories from AAA to single A. And you all at that AAA rated level are in basically the top 15% of all counties nationally in terms of your credit rating. And that's has a lot to do with the way you've managed yourselves over the years. It also has to do with the fact that we're in a very attractive state in North Carolina. And you can see that a little bit if you look right below the national statistics to the North Carolina statistics. There are 13 AAA rated counties in the state of North Carolina. That represents about 23, just under 25% of all rated counties in the state. Not all counties are rated. You can see here there's 56 of the 100 counties that are rated. You only need a credit rating if you have public bonds outstanding. So not all counties have public bonds outstanding. Not all counties have a credit rating. So little last piece I wanted to hit on the rating agencies here is on page 5. And just as a little bit of perspective for what goes into that credit score, what goes into that credit rating. All of the rating agencies have their own methodologies and analysis that they go through. They all end up being very similar. And I think Moody's, since we're focusing on them for the peer comparatives, let's focus on them for the rating methodology discussion. That's in the top left corner here on page 5. There's 4 key categories that Moody's looks at. Economy, which is 30% of the overall rating. Financial performance, which is 30%, institutional framework, which is 10%, and leverage, which is another way of saying debt and debt obligations, is the remaining 30%. Of these factors, institutional framework is a set score. As a county in North Carolina, you're going to get a AA rating for that specific category. That is a Moody's standard. Economy, the remaining 30%, is things like your assessed value per capita, it's your resident income levels, it's your county GDP levels. These are big picture items, economic items that you all as a board don't necessarily have direct, immediate control over. You can encourage economic development, you can adopt different zoning policies to further development if you choose to do that, to grow the tax base. But there's no one decision you all can make as part of this budget to immediately change that economic score. So we tend to focus in these conversations on what you do have direct or short-term control over, which is financial performance. And you all have done a very nice job on that over the years, maintaining a very healthy fund balance in line above your fund balance policies, revenues exceeding expenditures. You have control over that as part of the budget, and you've done a nice job with that. And then the remaining 30%, that leverage or your debt outstanding. And so tonight, as part of the capital plan, right, we're going to be mostly focused on that leverage or debt outstanding component of this overall rating. Okay? So quickly, I wanted just to give you an overview on your existing tax-supported debt outstanding. Like Beverly said, this is not anything to do with your water and sewer debt. This is only tax-supported debt that is paid for from general fund revenues. And you all had, at the end of this prior fiscal year, June 30, 2023, just under $450 million of total tax-supported debt outstanding. And you can see here on page 7 the breakout between the county at right at $80 million, the schools at about $330 million, and the community college right at $35 million of total debt outstanding. See that breakdown. Another way of looking at that is shown on page 8. This is the breakdown not by purpose, but by the type of debt that's issued. Most of your debt outstanding, just under $415 million, is general obligation bond indebtedness. That is debt that was largely voted by the taxpayers and backed by the full faith, credit, and taxing power of the county. So just under $450 million of total debt outstanding. What does that mean for a county your size, right? In order to give you a little bit of perspective on that, we look at a series of debt ratios. What we refer to that is your debt capacity. How much debt do you have outstanding under this series of ratios, and how does that compare to others? How does that compare to your policies? And the first ratio that we look at is introduced here on the right-hand side of page 8. It's called the 10-year payout ratio. This is the percentage of principal you have outstanding that you're repaying in the first 10 years. So you have, again, roughly $450 million of total principal outstanding. You are repaying a little over $310 million of that over the first 10 years. That equates to right at 70%. So your 10-year payout ratio is 70%. You will retire 70% of the $450 million over the first 10 years. That's a very solid 10-year payout ratio. And there's a little more on that on page 9. You all have a financial policy on this 10-year payout ratio. It's a minimum policy equal to 50%. So you have to repay at least 50% of your tax-supported debt over the first 10 years. You all are, again, right at that 70% level. So well above that policy. In this case, higher is better, repaying debt more quickly, more rapidly. And you can see on the right-hand side of the page, this is the first peer comparative that we're introducing. And I'll walk you through this one. There's a couple others. They're all set up the same way. But you all are in the top in that gold bar. That's your 70% 10-year payout ratio. The light green bars are the national AAA median. So this is the midpoint of all of that data. You all are part of this national AAA median. Then we have the national AA1 and national AA2 medians. Those are the light green bars. The dark green bars are the North Carolina medians, AAA, AA1, and AA2. Again, you all fall into this top dark green bar of AAA. The other thing we've got for you on the North Carolina medians is the range. This light blue bar that's superimposed, light blue line that's superimposed, shows the minimum data point and the maximum data point for all the counties that fall into that group. So you can kind of see the midpoint as well as the low and the high to give you a sense of that range. And you all, on this 10-year payout ratio, are right on top of that North Carolina AAA median. So in good shape there. Oftentimes, depends on where folks are in their issuance cycle or capital project funding cycle. Some will be closer to 50%, some will be closer to 100%, depending upon where they are in the capital funding process. But 70% is a good level, well above your current policy. The next ratio that we're going to look at on page 10 is your debt to assessed value. This is your debt outstanding as a percentage of the overall tax base. And you all have a policy not to exceed 3%. You're down closer to 1% right now, so well below that policy limit. And again, on this ratio, right in line with the North Carolina AAA median. So in very good shape here. You can see there's others as high as roughly 2% debt to assessed value. You all at 1% are in very good shape. This is a policy that we would say you have debt capacity. Your policy is 3%. You're at 1%. So you have room if you chose to issue additional debt to fund projects. There's room within this ratio to do that. We would say you have debt capacity. You'll notice these light green bars for the national medians are lower. There's less debt to assessed value for national counties than there are for North Carolina counties. You lose a little bit of comparability in this ratio because folks like South Carolina have independent school districts where those school districts have their own taxing power. They issue their own debt, so the county does not have any school debt on their books. So that's the national medians lose a little bit of relevance here. We tend to focus on these North Carolina medians for this ratio, as well as the next ratio on page 11, which is debt service to expenditures. This is your annual debt service payment as a percentage of the overall budget. Again, you have a policy here not to exceed 15%. You all in fiscal year 24 are projected to be at roughly 13%. We do have a little bit of a step up in fiscal year 25. You all issued the school GO bonds that were approved at referendum this past year. And so when those bonds start paying principal, your debt service payment increases slightly. And so that's where you see that step up to roughly 14% debt service to expenditures in FY25. You're below this policy, but a little closer than you were on debt to assessed value. Still have debt capacity under this policy, but not quite as much as you do under the debt to assessed value. And again, you can look at the peer comparatives and you're below that North Carolina AAA median. So all in all, taken as a whole, compared to your policies, compared to your peers, we would say that under these ratios, you have debt capacity. It's reasonable for you all to consider additional debt as a tool to fund capital projects if you choose to do so within your policies and compared to peers. The related question, but different, is debt affordability. So equate it back to our own personal finances. I can go to a bank, they pull my credit score, and they may pre-approve me for a $50,000 mortgage. But I may know I've got childcare expenses and I have, grocery bills for my parents that I'm helping with, and I can't afford that mortgage. I don't have the cash flow to pay it. Even though the bank will lend it to me, I can't pay it back. My cash flow does not meet that. And that's kind of what debt affordability is. We establish your debt capacity, but we also need to know what revenues are available to repay any loans that we take out. And you all, as part of this budget cycle, went through a process of establishing a series of debt funds for both the county and your educational partners, the schools and the community college. And for each of these components, each of these debt funds, you have established a dedicated tax rate. So we've got what we call an affordability analysis for each component, the county, the schools, and the community college. Page 12 is the county version of this analysis. And I'm going to walk you through this one, and I'll give you the highlights of the schools and the community college, but I do want you to understand how this is set up if you go back and review this in the future. It's all column A by fiscal year. Column B is the existing county debt service. This is your payments of principal and interest. Column C is a placeholder for any future debt service if we choose to evaluate any additional county debt issuance. Column D is tied to some economic development projects, and you all have a specific economic development debt fund that we're showing as part of the county here. And then there's some service charges associated with your debt payments in column E, and so we get to your total requirements in column F. That's what you have to meet every year associated with the county debt service. Column G is the dedicated tax rate for county debt. This is 1.75 cents. That was established as part of the fiscal year 24 budget. And then column H is the economic development fund revenue. That is a dedicated 0.39 cents on the tax rate. So we get to a total revenue available for economic development and county debt in column I. And in fiscal year 24, that was $8.3 million. So column J is merely showing us our annual surplus and deficits based upon column I versus column F. And column K is tracking the reserve balance that could be built up over time if you leave these existing dedicated tax rates in place. And as your current debt service declines, you do build up future reserves or future affordability to fund additional capital projects. In this case, starting in fiscal year 25, you would have about $190,000 in reserve. And then in column J, the highlighted green numbers are the annual dollars that would be available to put towards additional capital or debt service payments. So you have, on the county side, you have affordability. We've established you have capacity. Under this county debt fund, you have affordability within this debt fund. Very similar setup on page 13 for the schools. Again, I won't walk through it in as great a detail here, but a couple of things to note. Existing debt service only, that's in column B. Dedicated tax rate to the school debt fund in column F is 1.94 cents. And then there are a series of restricted revenues that the county receives that can only be used for school capital or debt service. And in this case, column G is the lottery proceeds, lottery revenue, and column H is the sales tax revenues. So we are forecasting those as part of this debt affordability analysis. And column I is the premium on the recent GO bonds that we issued. That's additional dollars that you all received as part of the issuance, and that's used to pay interest until it runs out. And so what you see here is that because of the recent GO bonds that were issued, there are a couple of years in fiscal year 25 and 26 where our annual revenues are not sufficient to cover our annual payments. But you all have built up a reserve, and that reserve is ample to cover those projected annual shortfalls, such that starting in fiscal year 26, you have a minimum reserve balance of $5.9 million, And for fiscal year 27 and beyond, you have annual surpluses that could be applied to future debt service or capital projects. We're going to come full circle on this. I'm going to give you perspective on what all that means here in a moment. Finally, page 14 is the community college. And this is a very, very similar setup, but there is one nuance. You all have approved, the citizens have approved 32.75 million of community college GO bonds that have not yet been issued. We have factored that into this analysis. It is assumed that those bonds are issued later this fiscal year 24 or early fiscal year 25, and payments would start on those in fiscal year 25. So that's what you see in column C. Existing community college debt is in B. Column C is the proposed, what we're calling the proposed, additional community college GO debt that has already been approved by the voters. Factored that in. We have the dedicated tax rate for the community college in column F. It's just under 1 penny, 0.97 cents. And what you see is factoring in the proposed community college debt service, there are annual deficits from fiscal year 25 through fiscal year 2033, and the reserve balance is not enough to cover that. The reserve balance goes negative. That was expected because as part of the GO referendum, it was anticipated if the bonds are issued, there was going to need to be additional revenue put in place to cover the debt service once it was issued. So in order to kind of balance out this fund as part of the fiscal year 25 budget, there would need to be approximately 0.65 cents added to that dedicated tax rate. For purposes of the rest of this analysis, we assume that that is done as part of the fiscal year 25 budget process. And if that happens, you can see over in column M, you start to have annual surpluses again in fiscal year 26. Again, those green highlights are going to be your future affordability for additional community college debt. In the budget, community college and schools are rolled together into the education debt fund. So we have rolled these two together for you on page 15, just so you can see that. But they are tracked separately in terms of the dedicated tax rates and the affordability analyses. So, with that being said, I told you I was going to move quickly. I wanted to give you a little bit of perspective on what all that means. And in order to do that, we've gone through a process to kind of generically calculate what is your debt capacity and your debt affordability. If you maximize your debt issued under your policies, or if you maximize your debt affordability, how much debt could you issue? Not to say that you have to, but just what is your upper limit within your policies or within your current dedicated revenue sources. And the results of that is shown here on page 18. Column C is maximizing your debt to assessed value. And if you did that over the next 6 years, fiscal year 24 to 29, you could issue an additional $1.3 billion of debt and still be in compliance with your debt to assessed value policy. If you did that, your debt service to expenditures would be well out of compliance there at the 31%. So of your debt ratios, as we saw earlier and expected, debt service to expenditures is more of the limiting factor. And within that policy, between fiscal 24 and 29, you could issue about $225 million of new debt outstanding and still be in compliance with that policy. So in terms of debt capacity, debt service to expenditures, again, is that more limiting factor. Columns E through G, or E through H, are showing your debt affordability, right? And because we have 3 different funds with different dedicated tax rates, we calculate this affordability individually. And so for the county side of things, between fiscal year 24 and 29, you have about $33 million of additional affordability. Within that existing dedicated tax rate, you could fund the debt service payments on approximately $33 million of additional debt issued. On the school side, that same number is about $129 million, but it happens in fiscal year 27 through 29. If you see that, if you remember, we were using some of that reserve balance in the first couple of years. So the affordability on the schools really comes back into play starting in fiscal year 27. And then on the community college, this does factor in, again, assuming that the additional 0.65 cents is in place with the already approved GO referendum. You could issue another roughly $19 million for a total of $182 million of new debt issued between the three debt funds from fiscal year 24 to 29. And if you were to issue that $182 million, a couple years where the timing doesn't necessarily line up with your debt capacity under your debt service to expenditures, but really would expect that to be in compliance with all the debt policies over the life of that. So kind of gives you a little bit of perspective headed into the capital planning process, what you're looking at in terms of debt capacity, debt affordability. If you choose to fund capital projects with debt over and above these limits, there may need to be other revenues put in place to be able to support that. And if you do choose to issue the debt as part of a funding plan, a couple of things that we'd suggest to keep in mind or be aware of. And this is the last piece for tonight. Page 20 is just a little overview on the Local Government Commission. As I know you all are aware, the Local Government Commission approves all local government debt that's issued. And for the most part, in order to issue debt through the LGC, they have to make a series of findings, one of which is that the amount you're borrowing is adequate but not excessive. And in order to make that finding, that's a statutory finding they have to make, oftentimes the LGC will require to have bids and permits in hand. And I mention this because it's often brings us back full circle to fund balance. You have to be able to cash flow your design of projects until you're ready to issue bonds to fund them, because you got to get to that point of having bids in hand. So that's an important consideration that we're going to be looking at as part of the capital funding process. There's other series of findings that you have to make it through the Local Government Commission, and that's something that we've got to be aware of when we're structuring a financing calendar. In addition to understanding the LGC requirements, you'd also need to determine what is your preferred funding credit, or the credit of debt that you're going to issue. And a couple of things I'll highlight for you on this page. If you do choose to use debt as part of the upcoming capital funding plan, some considerations here. The first one is actually not debt, pay-as-you-go capital. This is paying cash for capital projects. Obviously, you don't have to pay any interest on that if you pay cash for it, but you have to have all of the money up front. So for larger projects, it can delay the timing of when that project happens. There's also projects that are maybe longer-term projects that folks who have lived in the community, you're saving up fund balance to pay for it, and they may no longer be in the community, but they paid into that project, versus the people who move into the community may not have paid anything into that project, but now they're enjoying it. So for larger life cycle projects, long-term useful life projects, oftentimes debt is a helpful funding tool to either accelerate the cost or spread that cost out over the life cycle of the project. And if you do choose to issue debt, a couple of two really key options you have for governmental projects. The first that y'all are very familiar with, you've done a lot of these, are general obligation bonds. Other than very minor exceptions, it requires a referendum, a vote of the people. So you have to go to the citizens and get their approval to issue that debt. It's the lowest cost of funds. It is your AAA rating. It is backed by the full faith and credit of the county. It is going to give you your lowest interest rate overall. You do not have to mortgage any facilities to do that. The credit is the county and the county's tax rate. The security is the county and the county's tax rate. On the flip side of that, it does have the lowest cost of funds. It is the best interest rate you're going to get, but it does take a longer period of time because you have to time it to be able to get approval through a referendum. And after the referendum, there's a series of legal steps you have to go through to authorize that. And if it is voted and the vote fails, you may not be able to get approval for other types of debt from the local government commission until time has passed or significant things have changed with the project. So oftentimes we see projects that have high community interest like schools, community college, parks, roads be issued through general obligation bonds. Parks and roads have another reason to be issued as general obligation bonds because some lenders don't like to take a mortgage on a park, and it's very hard to take a mortgage on a road. So oftentimes GOs are one of your only options for funding those type of projects. The second option is an installment financing or a limited obligation bond. This is a financing that is secured by an asset. So, an auto loan, for example, or a mortgage would be an installment financing. And this is where if you issue debt to fund a county building, you can secure that debt with the county building. Oftentimes, things like, courthouses, jails, other projects that are required to be funded that you all don't necessarily have the final say on whether they're funded are limited obligation bonds or installments are a tool that's used because of the fact that you can be mandated to fund that regardless of whether a GO bond is approved or not. So this comes with a slightly higher interest rate, but it allows you faster access to the capital markets if you choose to issue bonds. You don't have to wait to the referendum process. What you do have to do is wait for bids and permits in hand so you can get approval from the local government commission. No referendum is required. It does require a public hearing. And so those are kind of the two main options that are used for the funding of general governmental projects. Some other information in here, but I've taken up too much of your time already tonight. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions. There is a lot of information in the appendix. Appendix A has the details of all of those debt capacity cases and debt affordability cases that I walked you through that summary on. And then there's a series of information on your policies as well as the details of your existing tax-supported debt outstanding. So like Beverly said, thought this would be a helpful reference tool headed into the overall capital planning process. Again, happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Next on the agenda is item 23-751, wastewater pump station approval, request for Stonebridge Enclave Development. I will recognize County Manager for this item.
Good evening, board members. So as you are aware, the county has adopted a policy that pump stations and the approval of pump stations come to you for your consideration. This includes new pump stations as well as the expansion of existing pump stations, and that's currently what we have under the current circumstance. There's a subdivision, it's a Stonebridge subdivision. It's a very large subdivision. It's been under construction for a number of years. And a pump station was previously approved prior to the policy that the board has, which served a number of phases within that subdivision. And they are just now in the beginnings of actually constructing that pump station. already approved. They're in the beginning phases of constructing that. The developers of that subdivision decided that they wanted to add an additional area to the subdivision. It's called the Stone Ridge Enclave, and it's actually this little purple area up here. It is not part of the original subdivision. It is an extension. In order to serve that, they are proposing some options here. It's 39 lots, so 39 homes, which would be, current request would be to flow that to the new pump station that is being built, which is this pump station right here. And this would be the route that they would take in order to flow that. Why you're here today is because that pump station is not sized to handle those additional 39 lots. They would actually, I take that back. The wet well and the lines are sized appropriately. The pump itself is not sized appropriately. They'd actually have to upsize the pump. That's a relatively minor increase, but it's still an expansion. It's still something the board would have to approve, but it is actually approving the upsizing of the pumps to serve those 39 lots. What you don't see, which it really isn't shown on here, is if the board were to say, well, we really don't like that solution, they do have another solution. However, it still goes to a pump station. It is a gravity line which would actually come across the line, follow the roadway, and connect to an existing pump station that's here. That particular option does not require an upsizing of the pump station. Pump station already exists. It can accommodate that additional development. However, it does add, I believe it's about 3,000 linear feet of additional gravity sewer line that we would then have to own and maintain. That is a gravity option. That is not an option that the board can actually choose to deny. If they want to go that route, they can actually choose that route, and the board would have no decision authority on that. Your decision authority is for pump stations only. Just to give you an idea, this is the actual layout for that enclave section that I was talking about, the 39 additional lots. It's on 45 acres. As you can see, it's a little bit less than 1 acre per, 1 lot per acre. But they've condensed the lots. They're smaller sizes to fit on the 45 acres. The original area that is served by the pump station is this gray area here. And that's the original subdivision phase 4, or at least part of phase 4, that was approved and already going to be served by the pump station that's under construction right now. This is that route that I was talking to you earlier, that if they were to say, well, the board says no to the pump station expansion, they would choose to bring this out to the actual roadway, follow the roadway, and come down to the pump station in order to serve that particular development. It's important to note that it is actually more expensive for the county to own and maintain the additional gravity sewer line versus the expansion of the pump. The expansion of a pump really is a matter of hours that we would have to pay for the electricity, and obviously the maintenance of the pump itself, which we are going to maintain a pump, whether it is larger or smaller. If we have to replace the pump, there is a higher cost of replacing the pump. But actually maintaining the gravity line of approximately 3,000 linear feet is actually more expensive over the lifetime of the actual project, just so you're aware of that. We've given you some rationales for whether you approve or deny this. Obviously, it is the board's decision. You do ask the staff, give you a recommendation. In this particular item, we would recommend that you approve this request. Again, it is a minor expansion of the pump. We believe the life cycle cost of the pump is far outweighs the life cycle cost of maintaining the gravity line, but it's certainly the board's decision. If you feel that that expanding that pump is a concern that you have, we certainly understand that. And I'll answer any questions that you might have about this request.
Madam Vice Chair, I've got some questions. Brian, as far as the upgrade for the pump is concerned, how much additional development would that upgrade accommodate?
It is specific to that particular request, which is about 10,900 gallons, a little less than 11,000 gallons for the 39 lots.
So essentially just this one project?
That is correct.
Thank you. As far as the lot sizes are concerned, do you have any kind of beat on what size lots we're talking about with Stonebridge Enclave?
I don't know the lot sizes offhand. I can get that for you, but I apologize, I do not know the lot sizes offhand.
Okay.
Madam Vice Chair, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Brian, you showed the purple up here back on your slide.
Yes, sir. This
for-
purple line, yes, sir.
And then you show the dotted line down to the pump station.
Yes, sir. That was this line here.
Yep. How much distance is that? That's gravity feed as well,
It
right?
is gravity feed to this particular section right here. What is that? Do you remember that linear foot? John?
No, I couldn't tell you the exact footage, but the actual connection that you're looking at, you see the purple outline there?
Mm-hmm.
That gravity connection, they're building the gravity system for Phase 4 already, so it's a very short connection up that street just to connect into the proposed development.
So what John is saying, let me go back here, is that this, a good bit of this is already being constructed as part of Phase 4. The connection from here to here is a very small connection. I don't have that total linear feet, but they're already building this connection as part of their Phase 4, which is already approved in the pump station.
Do they already have approval for sewage usage?
Yes, sir, they do. Now, that's for Phase 4. Now, obviously, for the enclave, that's different. They will have to go through the process of securing the flow through the pump, through the capacity. This is whether or not the board will allow the pump station to be expanded. They still have to go through the process of getting their flow approved. You can't, you have one step at a time, so you have to do this first. But they already have the other phase approved, that is already approved, and that's why they're under construction with their pump station already.
Madam Vice Chair?
Yes.
So, Brian, just for clarity, then, depending on the decision that the board makes tonight, then that would influence the next steps for this development and permitting, correct?
That's correct, yes, sir.
So are they going to do this work with a tentative 10-year before there's capacity available for that?
Well, currently, there is capacity within the 12 Mile Creek, so we're not out of capacity at this point in time. Now, obviously, they have to go through the process, and they have to go through the permitting for it, but there is capacity. And the board has authorized an expansion of capacity. And if you recall, the General Assembly actually passed legislation which allows us, as well as other jurisdictions, to approve projects over 100% of our capacity once a construction contract is issued for that expansion. So it is conceivable that this could still be permitted even if we reach 100% and we're in that construction phase for that as well. That is, I couldn't tell you whether it's going to be at the 100% or not. I just know there's capacity today.
Brian, is there any more phases planned for the original Stonebridge neighborhood that may require additional upgrades to this pump station that we're aware of?
No, so this pump station was sized for all of the phases that are to come. Now, they're not under construction yet, so those phases are not necessarily under construction, but it was sized to accommodate those additional phases.
So the request here is essentially, just to sort of recap, but the request here is to upgrade our existing pump station to accommodate brand-new development that would be in close proximity to the original Stonebridge.
That's correct, yes, sir. Any additional questions?
And this is the most cost-effective option considering, future maintenance, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. We would say that absolutely maintaining the expansion of the pump is certainly less expensive than maintaining
The
more than
gravity
3,000 of the linear, of the gravity. And as I said before, they still have the option of constructing that if the board says we do not approve the pump station. They still have that ability if they choose to. Now, it's expensive, obviously, and they would have to make that financial decision. Thank you. Well, I am, yeah, so I am looking for an answer, a vote, if the board so chooses, but I don't think I need to stand up here for y'all to make that decision.
Please
Thank you.
join us. Are there any more questions, or, we have a motion, two options before us, we've passed that down. Two choices, front and back, or page one, page two.
Madam Vice Chair, I'll make the motion to approve the upgrade of the pump station.
Just read that all the way through.
All right. We approve the application request concerning the Stonebridge Enclave development for a wastewater pump station. As such, pump station solution is set forth in the application associated with the request in accordance with Section 336B1 of the Union County Code, and 2, adopt the utility-based rationale statement for approval.
Madam Vice Chair?
Yes.
I believe that I'm going to be in opposition to the motion, and I'll explain why. I've got some concern that what we're doing here with upgrading our existing pump stations is creating a bit of a precedent to enable more development. I also have concerns over the school impact. So this particular parcel and this development would be zoned for Western Union. And as I understand, the school capacity there is already at 98%. In addition to that, our impact statement from UCPS in February of 2023 also indicates that we could have potentially 3,000 plus more residential units proposed for the Parkwood cluster. So, and that would include many different projects that are at least in the process of being discussed in the municipality of Waxhaw. So with these concerns, I don't think I can support the motion.
Are there any other comments or questions? Yes, Commissioner
The
Helms.
concern I have is going over 100% if you can. That's what got us in trouble back in the early 2000s. And it created havoc and threats of the state taking over our system. I know I was out for a period of time, and for years I've been hearing we've been in the 90 percentile utilization, and even growing to the point last I heard it was 98%. You know, that's dangerous, and for that reason I can't support it.
Okay, with the motion on the floor, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
Okay, so that will not,
Madam Vice Chair, do we need a
Yes.
new motion?
yeah.
Madam Vice Chair, I'll make the motion to deny the pump station application request deny the application request concerning Stonebridge Enclave development for a wastewater pump station, as such pump station solution is set forth in the application associated with the request in accordance with Section 34-336B1 of Union County Code, and 2, adopt the utility-based rationale statement for denial. Do I need to read that statement?
No, you're good. Okay, all those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
Our next matter of business is item 23-779, PFAS class action settlement update. I want to recognize Hung Yi, Union County Water Administrator, for this item.
Good evening, Commissioners, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, County Manager. So appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about PFAS and the class action settlement. So in the past, we have talked to the board about PFAS as a chemical, as a thing that we have to treat in the water treatment process. There have been some developments, and so there's also some deadlines that we have to consider. So that's why we're in front of you today to ask for your guidance in terms of how we should approach some of these lawsuits that are in front of us. So I'm just going to briefly, again, in case anyone's forgotten, go over what PFAS is and why it matters, talk to you about some of the things that the EPA has done in terms of health advisory levels, what we're doing as a utility to monitor, and then talk to you briefly about the class action settlements, the proposed settlements, and sort of what's all involved. And, you know, Jason Kay, the county attorney, can always step in anytime he likes to explain the lawyer stuff. And then we're going to give you a recommendation at the end as to what we'd like for the board to do and to get some direction from you all as to how we should proceed. So what is PFAS? So basically, it's a group of manufactured chemicals that have been in use in industry and consumer products since the 40s. It is in just about everything. There are thousands of different chemicals, compounds, and we just classify them as PFAS. They're used in everything from food packaging. So if you go to Burger King or McDonald's or wherever, and you get one of those shiny paper wrappers around a hamburger, that's got PFAS in it. That's what makes it shiny. Any kind of water or stain repellent fabric, your carpet probably has it. Non-stick products, so basically your frying pans. Basically Teflon, everything, pretty much everything has PFAS in it. Firefighting foams. So it is literally, it's in just every product that you're touching, using nowadays. They're also known as forever chemicals because the bonds that create PFAS and that make them so useful as a product in manufacturing and in consumer products also means that they don't break down in the environment. So when they go in the landfill, they stay in the landfill. They don't decompose, they don't break down. And that's what makes them so useful, but also such a challenge for a water utility to pull it out of the water system. So the reality is that most Americans have been exposed to PFAS from the time that they're born. You know, we're exposed to it, we're all carrying it, we all have it in our bodies. And just like the second bullet says, some of these PFASs can accumulate in the human body. And scientists have identified that drinking water, basically, when we pull water from the rivers, treat it, and we put it through the water system, it's identified as a key pathway for ingesting or consuming PFAS products into the human body. And since the 40s, or since when we've been treating water, the vast majority of municipal water systems, the treatment systems are not designed to treat PFAS or pull it out of the water before we put it into the pipes that often, that go to the people's homes. They're not designed for it, nor have they been regulated in the past. So what has been happening, though, is there's recognition that PFAS it's an important chemical that needs to be regulated, and so the Environmental Protection Agency has started doing so. Recently, June 15th, 2022, the EPA issued updated drinking health advisory levels for PFOA and PFAS. And you can see the full spelling of it. If you're wondering what it stands for, there you go. Perfluorooctanoic acid and octanosulfonic acid. And so those are some of the two primary chemicals. There were standards issued before 2016, but they were updated in 2022, and that's really what we're working against. And these interim health advisory levels, they're going to remain in place until the EPA adopts a national primary drinking water regulation for PFAS. Honestly, I expected to hear about it or see something this fall from the EPA. They're just taking their time with it, and they're taking longer than we expected. We had expected to hear something from the EPA in terms of what that regulation would be like this fall. It could come pretty much any time. They're not going to tell us that it's coming. It's just going to come. It could be a year from now. It could be 2 years from now. But we do expect it sometime soon that there will be some sort of final EPA regulation for PFAS. In addition to PFOA and PFAS, there's also two other chemicals, HPFO and GenX chemicals. You may have heard about GenX because of the spill, I think on one of the rivers that feed into Wilmington on the Cape Fear Peninsula. GenX is like a newer version of PFAS. It's composed differently, but it's still basically the same kind of thing. The health advisory level, the EPA, they set these standards for PFOA. It was 4 parts per trillion. We typically measure things in parts per billion. So when we are talking about parts per trillion, 4 parts of PFOA in, per trillion units of water. And for PFAS, we're talking about 20. These are interim limits, but when we are measuring at the parts per trillion level, just so you know, it is almost at the limits of our ability to detect using the methods that we have right now. So when we monitor, at least for the first two, if the health advisory level is 4, we're at 2.3 for the first one, just when we go and measure water within our utility. It comes out of, we're measuring out of Catawba, so when the finished water leaves the water plant, we measure it right there. We're showing that for PFOA, it's 2.3 is what we're measuring on average, and for PFAS, it's 5.7. So for both of those, we are below the health advisory limit. For GenX chemicals and PFBS, they're 10 and 20, they're individually combined, there's a health index involved. But for us, we're not detecting any elements of either of those in our drinking water supply when we measure. So the EPA, as they're going from these interim health advisory limits to their proposed rule, some of the things that they're going to ask us to do is they're going to ask us to monitor, regularly measure, regularly sample, and take readings and keep track of what you got in your water system. And if you do have it in your water system, notify the public of what these levels are. And if you do have it in your water system and they are above the limits, take whatever actions you deem necessary to reduce it to below the threshold that they have set. The table that you're seeing are the compounds that the EPA have asked us to, well, not us, just us, but every utility to measure. And what right now on your right is the enforceable levels. They would ideally like to have zeros, to have no PFAS in the water at all. But at this point, the enforceable level for the EPA is 4 parts per trillion for PFAS and PFOA. For all the other compounds on the left, the bottom 4, they're basically creating an index. And as long as you're under the hazard index of 1, you're fine. And so when we look at those, we are under the hazard index of 1. And so right now, we're okay on pretty much those as well. What we do right now is currently we test the finished water coming out of the Catawba water plant for PFAS routinely. We check regularly, so I think it's about once a quarter we take samples. We're routinely below 4 parts per trillion, and we're also below the EPA hazard index of 1. We sample throughout the year, and again, at this point, we're just trying to generate data so that we know how much, it could be seasonal, it could be, the warm weather could affect it, who knows? We're just now trying to gather data so that we have history and trends so that we can decide, what the best practices are for us for removing these compounds out of the water. Whenever the EPA finalizes their rules, and when we know what the impact will be on us as a utility, we'll obviously have to decide what is the best method, treatment process, alternative for pulling out PFAS from the drinking water before it enters the supply. At this time, and this is the honest truth, we do not know what it will cost us. No utility knows what it's going to cost to remove PFAS unless they're dealing with it in a very specific example, like there's been a chemical spill like there is in Cape Fear. So this, and I think it's on the next slide, so we've actually asked one of our engineering firms that we have sort of on contract to take a look. What are the options for removing PFAS? What are the alternatives? Give us a range. Knowing that we don't know what the regulations are from the EPA, just what are the treatment process alternatives? And there's 5 listed here, all the way from, I think that's polyaluminum chloride, which to pull it out, it's a coagulant, all the way to reverse osmosis on the right, being the most expensive. So the treatment alternatives go anywhere from about $6 million to over $200 million. This is in a vacuum, without knowing what the EPA is going to tell us to do, without really having a lot of data coming out of our water, testing data. It's just in a vacuum. Once we have to then take this and say, well, we want to do the middle option and we want to apply it to Catawba, then we'd have to really figure out, what the engineering costs are to sort of shoehorn this treatment process into an existing water plant. So the range of costs could be lower, I guess, to very, very high, depending on what's required. So that takes us to the class action lawsuit. So we're not the only utility dealing with this. Public water systems actually sued, they filed lawsuits against a number of manufacturers of PFAS, alleging that this compound is creating harm in the drinking water and creating cost for utilities to monitor and to treat. These lawsuits were consolidated in a federal court in Charleston, South Carolina. There were I'll just say that there were 2 defendants out of all of these lawsuits that have already settled. 3M and DuPont, so they're 2 of the biggest manufacturers of the compound. So the DuPont settlement totals $1.85 billion, and the 3M settlement totals between $10.5 to $12.5 billion. So as a co-owner of the Catawba Regional Water Supply Project, we actually are a class member. And the key decision point for us and for the board ultimately is in that last bullet. We have to decide whether we want to stay in the class of the settlement, in which case we'll be in the class and then we'll receive something eventually, or we want to opt out and we want to do nothing or file our own lawsuit. So for DuPont, the settlement date is 12/4/23, so it's not too far away. It's a couple of weeks. And for 3M, it's 12/11, which is just a week later. So that's why we're talking to you now, because we actually would like some guidance from the Board of County Commissioners as to the guidance that you would like us, the direction you would like us to take. So to give you a little bit more detail, the settlement recovery, the amount of money involved, it's billions of dollars for them, but we're not going to get all that because it's split up between potentially all the water utilities in North America. And there are over 3,000, close to 4,000. So if everyone opts in, the math gets, divided by that, and it could be, a very small number. So there are a lot of variables, but one is, depending on if you do remain in the lawsuit, the first is the concentration of PFAS in the water. And as I've told you, as I showed you, we don't have a lot. We're under the 4 parts per trillion. We're in non-detect levels for the others. And 2 is the water flow rate. How much, how concentrated it is in your water, and how much are you pushing out into the system, and how much of it is being consumed by your customers. So there's a whole entire table generated by the lawyers to slot you into a place. For us, when we look at that table, settlement table, for DuPont, the estimated recovery is somewhere around $740 $40,000 to $750,000 for us, based on our concentrations of PFAS in the water and based on the gallonage that we flow out of the water plant. Since we only own 50% of the water plant, we would get half of that, obviously, and so the column on the right shows you what that half would be. The other half would go to our partner in Lancaster, South Carolina. For 3M, it's a little bit more. 3M, it's roughly around 7.7 million, 7.7 to 7.8. Again, half of that would be about $3.8 to $3.9 million would be our sort of half of the settlement. There are several conditions tied to receiving these funds. The first is the county would have to release all PFAS-related claims against DuPont and 3M. So we're not going to sue them ever again in the future. And that's an important consideration because I think one of the settlements, and I apologize, I can't remember which one, says not only can you not sue us for PFAS in the water, you can't sue us for PFAS in your wastewater or biosolids. You just can't sue us ever again for anything, even if you have to deal with treating PFAS in your wastewater stream. And as I've noted, treating PFAS could be anywhere from $5.7 to $2.158 million in 2023. And if you add, even if you add this up, this is about $8.5 million total. If you take our share and Lancaster Water share, it would barely cover the low range option, and it would be nowhere near what we would need if we have to pay for a reverse osmosis system, if that's what's required, or even in the middle. So this is, the settlement dollars are just a small portion, potentially, of what it would cost us as a utility to remediate for PFAS treatment. There are several unknowns. First, we have no idea at this point what the limits are going to be from the EPA for the National Primary Drinking Water Regulation related to PFAS. We just don't know. Haven't heard anything. We've asked our fellow utilities, we've asked our water associations. We just don't know. Haven't heard anything from the EPA. There's nothing coming out. We also don't know how much PFAS we're going to have in the future in the water stream. If if DuPont should open a factory on the Catawba River, that's obviously that doesn't exist right now, but if they did, that's going to change the PFAS levels in the water potentially. So we don't know what the future looks like for us in terms of the levels of PFAS that we're going to have to deal with. The other thing that we are sort of very mindful of is that whatever happens at Catawba, we're about to start open a brand new water plant on the Yadkin River. So we still have to sort through how applicable this is to that. We also don't know what the future application is for any regulations as it relates to wastewater treatment, because we also have that. The last is if the board decides, you know what, we're going to opt out and we're going to sue 3M or DuPont, we're going to we sue them on our own. It is going to be expensive. I mean, they're multinationals, they have billions and billions of dollars. It could, between the legal process, the litigation, Jason Kay can probably tell you better, but it would be expensive and it would take a lot of time with no guarantees on the end as to what we may or may not get. So in case you're wondering, here's what the staff is recommending. We are recommending that Union County, we stay in the class. We opt in. It takes no action to opt in. It takes if we do nothing, if we say nothing to the lawsuit settlement people, we're in. It would take an active vote or an active motion on our part to opt out of the class. But as we discussed this also with the CRWSP board, the board voted, and it was a unanimous vote to recommend to both ownership groups, Lancaster Water and Union County, that we remain in the class. So if you ask the folks down at Catawba Water, at the water plant, their recommendation, their advice is remain in the class. That's probably the best bet for us as a utility. The other thing that we would do, once we stay in the class, is there are requirements for gathering data and submitting it to the courts in order to qualify for a payment of some sort. So we would do that. And I think we have 2 or 3 years to gather the data and submit. And so we would continue our data gathering activities. The last thing that we would ask is that whatever funds are, would come to us as by way of the settlement, our recommendation is that they be reserved by the county and by Lancaster Water and Sewer District for the water plant, for whatever future improvements are necessary at the water plant to treat for PFAS. Not knowing what they are, we'd just keep it in a reserve fund and keep it there until we know, and then apply these funds to that, should it become necessary. So, my request to the board is that we just ask, get direction from you all as to what you would like us to do. And our recommendation is that we stay in the class. That's it. I'll take, yes,
Can I
sir.
ask you a question? Lancaster and Union County is a independent water association, the two partners, right?
Yes.
If we vote to stay in this, does it prevent us from taking anything on the Yadkin?
That feels more like a legal question to me. So I'm going to defer to Jason Kay if that's okay.
I believe at this time, it would bar us from seeking recovery from these two entities, whatever the reason might be and wherever that damage might be located.
Then another question, I'm sure there's other water intakes on the Yadkin. Do we know what their testing have been on this?
We do not.
You don't know, or you don't know if there's any other water intakes?
Well, there are other water intakes,
Okay.
but I have not sought out information from other utilities to ask if they've been testing their water and what those results have been on the Yadkin River. I'm happy to go do some research and find out.
I'd really like to have that answer, since it limits us on this, before we take this vote, and we do have a couple weeks.
We do.
I mean, if we need to get back together, as a matter of fact, we've got a joint work session or something, if we, if somewhere along upstream the Yadkin, the PFAS levels are horrendous, makes a different situation.
I do not believe at this time that there are any future board meetings that would occur between now and the first of these opt-out dates on December the 4th. The second opt-out date is, I believe, December 11th, if I remember from the presentation. So it is certainly within the board's prerogative to call a special meeting with 48 hours notice to do that, but right now there's no general meeting on the schedule.
Madam Vice Chair.
Yes.
Young, just a couple of thoughts here. First of all, there's standards that regulate, water supply piping, anything that touches drinking water.
Yes, sir.
So one of the biggest ones in the plumbing industry is going to be a standard called NSF 61, which I'm sure you're aware. But there's nothing in current standards in plumbing or utilities that would essentially address PFAS. As far as in the products that transport drinking water, correct?
The products are
Meaning the piping systems.
the piping system.
Correct. There's nothing that's in those standards that has any kind of acceptable limits. All this is being driven by EPA regulation.
Well, yes, it's all being driven by EPA regulation.
And at this point, what we're seeing is where we think that the EPA is going to fall, correct? But that doesn't mean that in the future, they can't drive that mark for PFAS levels down to 0. So they could start us out up here, and then they could eventually mandate it down to nothing, correct? Am I understanding that?
Yeah, the EPA can regulate however they please.
Okay. So I think that what we're faced with tonight is whether or not decide that, we want to stay with the bird in the hand, or whether we should go for 2 in the bush. Is that correct? Essentially, that's our choice. I'm
not sure what's in the bush.
I was going to say that. I was going to say, I don't know that there are 2 birds in the bush, to be honest with you, but I see your point, certainly.
And that's sort of my concern here is if we choose to opt out of this class, that all bets are off. That, you know,
Yeah.
essentially, we would be one of many that would be going after these two companies. And then, of course, in addition to the legal fees we would incur, there may be nothing left in these settlements. Is that
That's
is that
fair.
fair, Mr. Kay?
Yeah, Commissioner Helms, to your point on this, choosing to opt out of this class would permit us to go after these particular two defendants. And keep in mind, these are just the first two that have proposed settlements. There may be others, perhaps many others. This is very early in the process. It is not unlike what folks are dealing with for mesothelioma and asbestos very early on in that public health matter. These are the first two that we're faced with. There will undoubtedly be many more, and there will be more data. But this is an early decision, as you put it well, kind of a bird in the hand type of analysis. And it is possible that these two companies will limit their financial exposure through a variety of legal maneuvers available to them, including bankruptcy, into the future, such that this may be the one and only chance to go after them. And there may perhaps be future defendants that come out and have additional settlements that are offered. This is really early in a really uncertain environment for something that by all looks at it appears to be big.
Thank you, Mr. Kay.
I just want to confirm that you only need a motion if the board wants to opt out.
Actually, yeah, if the board takes no action, technically, we stay in the class.
Okay.
But yes, if the board chooses to opt out, then that's a different scenario. I did want to say something, Madam.
Yes.
So I certainly understand board members' concern over this, and obviously, it's unknown territory for all of us. One of the things that we also have to keep in mind is what is the decision from Lancaster Water and Sewer? They are also our partners. I don't know at this time what decision they have made. The same recommendation from the Water and Sewer Board went to them as it gave to you, so we also have to keep that in mind. And be aware that, as Hung has indicated, our current data shows that the amount that we have is very low. So any attempt for us to basically take our own lawsuit that is going to be taken into consideration. How much actual impact do we have as our system versus other systems like in the Cape Fear, where they have opted out? It's because their impact is significant, and they have data to show that. So just be aware that that's a hard to overcome. That's a pretty heavy hill for us to deal with. But it's the board's decision. However you want to handle that, I just want to make sure that we all understand there's no easy path here.
Madam Vice Chair, if I may, to sort of add on to what the county manager is saying, Lancaster Water and Sewer, Brad Busey is the executive director, similar to me in this role. He is making the same recommendation to their board that Lancaster Water and Sewer remain within the class. I don't know the outcome of that discussion for that particular board, but I do know that Brad Busey is making the same recommendation that I just made to the Board of County Commissioners.
Madam Vice Chair?
Yes.
I would say at this point, I would be more in favor of staying in the class action lawsuit. And again, this kind of comes from my concern that, well, to Mr. Kay's point, that these two companies could enact legal protections, and we're not guaranteed any kind of substantial settlement, if we decided to pursue legal action on ourselves or by ourselves. My dad always told me it was kind of like this, that you can't get blood from a turnip. And so once that settlement is dried up, then we may be finding ourselves without any kind of, monetary gain there to combat this problem. So I think at this point, if we don't require a motion, then I would just say that would be my recommendation, but I'll defer to the board.
I agree with Commissioner Brian Helms to stay in and not opt out. And if you don't need a motion,
Uh,
we'll just roll on and
I
stay in.
Well, I like that phrase. I'm going to use it, Madam Vice Chair. We're going to roll on.
Roll on.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is item 23-783, Union County Human Services Campus Tobacco Use Ordinance. I want to recognize Mr. Dennis Joyner, Public Health Director, for this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners this evening, and County Management. Beginning in April 1st of 24, let me get this started. Starting on April the 1st of 2024, North Carolina Medicaid Managed Care is going to require all contracted providers to implement a tobacco-free policy that covers all of their property, essentially grounds as well as vehicles, as well as buildings. And so one of the things, obviously, we are a provider of Medicaid services at the Human Services Building. We see Medicaid patients in our public health clinic. We receive funding from Medicaid for various services. And so this is something that obviously we're going to have to look at and address. The particular tobacco-free policy that's being required includes both smoking as well as non-combustible tobacco products, including vaping, electronic cigarettes, smokeless tobacco, and nicotine products that are not approved by the FDA as a tobacco use treatment or medication. So it covers a broad swath of various elements for tobacco in what is prohibited. In the Human Services Agency, Public Health sees in fiscal year 22, we had just a little over 2,000 Medicaid patients, represented over 4,600 patient visits, and also represents Medicaid revenue of around $2.17 million per year. That's an average of 2 years. We receive funds both in terms of actual Medicaid, just general revenue, as well as Medicaid cost settlement and other sources of Medicaid funding. So what is the impact if we don't implement a tobacco-free policy? And by the way, we do have, along with many other parts of the county, we have a policy that focuses primarily on smoking, and it primarily is smoking in the building itself. So I want to clarify to say that not that we don't have any kind of policy in play right now, but there is a limitation. But if we fail to meet this particular requirement, what does that mean for us? Well, there's several things. We have General Statute 130A requires that public health link residents to needed personal health services, and so we need to ensure the provision of care and when it's otherwise unavailable. So we are a safety net provider to many in the community for services that are needed. And Medicaid patients also often do not have options for other necessary health care outside of public health. So therefore, if we don't do some adjustment to this ordinance that we're requesting, we would be at risk for possibly not being able to bill for and receive Medicaid reimbursement in the future. There are also some other provisions that encourage us to have such a tobacco-free campus. One of those, two of these relate to our accreditation requirements. And as you see here, one is efforts that local health departments to prohibit tobacco use in its facility, which we currently are doing that, at least for smoking, but not tobacco in other forms. And then also another benchmark for our accreditation which encourages tobacco-free grounds to prohibit tobacco in all grounds within 50 feet of the health department facility. So this is not exactly what the Medicaid is requiring, but it does speak to the fact that there are other things that are actually encouraging this kind of action. So this is a busy slide, and I apologize for that, but this kind of captures the bulk of what we're seeking to do. And essentially, it's revising section 26-119 that pertains to human services requiring to have a tobacco-free campus and allow for an administrative policy in carrying out the procedural aspects for this. The current ordinance, as you see listed there, smoking is prohibitive in the health division and the DSS properties, as I mentioned earlier. So this gets to the point I was speaking to, that it does provide an element of prohibition. It's just not quite as broad as the what the Medicaid requirement is seeking. The proposed revision that we're asking for section 26-119 is to have, to basically reword that ordinance, that smoking and tobacco use be prohibited on the Human Services campus in the broader terms. And essentially, it would be both internal to the facility as well as the grounds that comprises the facility. We would propose an effective date of this ordinance going into effect February 1st, and in the meantime, education and tobacco cessation support would be provided, certainly for staff, in advance to transition to this process. In terms of what this footprint would look like, this is the campus of the Human Services Agency. You have Skyway Drive or Highway 601 over here. This is the employee parking lot here. You have the public parking lot over here, and you have emergency services over on the southern side of this particular property. The property, what we're speaking of, essentially encompasses this blue area, which is essentially the footprint of the Human Services campus. And that is all that I have. I certainly will welcome any questions that you might have.
Do you mind going back to the aerial view, please? The very last one. So it was my understanding that that individuals were able to smoke in the right-of-ways or go out to the sidewalks, but if I'm looking at this correctly, then you would not be able to go to the right-of-ways or the sidewalks to smoke.
And Dennis, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure if the sidewalk is on a public right-of-way, that is not included in the Human Services campus.
Correct.
There are certain sidewalks around the facilities that are ours on our property, but the majority of those, especially along Skyway, are in DOT right-of-way, so that is a public space that would not be considered.
So that's the only sidewalk.
I believe it would be pretty much this side where my pointer is, going down the Skyway side. I'm not sure about Concord Avenue, but it's possible that that may also be in a public right-of-way.
Generally, the sidewalks that are along public streets are within the right-of-way. When they're interior to the parking complex, they're in what's referred to as a public vehicular area, and they are not considered right-of-way, although they're quasi-right-of-way, but for these purposes, not.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Vice Chair.
Yes.
Dennis, just for clarification, that this ordinance would only apply to the Human Services campus, correct?
That is correct.
Yeah, so I remember, several months ago, we sort of revisited this for all of Union County government buildings, and there was concern about some of those buildings. So I wanted everybody to be aware that we're only simply talking about the Human Services campus.
That is correct.
Something else that I wanted to ask about, Dennis, when I looked over the ordinance that was in our agenda packet, I guess I'm looking for a little bit of reassurance here, because in the definition for like tobacco product, one of the things that's mentioned here is it says, any product containing, made, or derived from tobacco or a tobacco derivative that is intended for human consumption, whether chewed, smoked, absorbed, dissolved, inhaled, snorted, sniffed, or ingested by any other means. When I read that, I had a little bit of concern with the way that that was worded. And I understand that tobacco cessation programs are probably going to be supported. But my concern is that, well, a lot of times you're going to have folks enrolled in those programs, and they're going to have patches, or they're going to have chewing gum and whatnot. And so I think for me, I would like to see a little bit of clarification there, at least in this ordinance, that those folks engaging in tobacco cessation programs would not be affected. And I understand,
Yeah.
I saw the slide here about education and tobacco cessation support, but I didn't see, unless I missed it, I didn't see anything in the ordinance.
You may be correct about that. I just wanted to point out that one of the definitions is here in terms of Medicaid. The intent is that certainly things that are being used for tobacco treatment and medications would be allowed, and that's the intent. And if that's not clear in the actual ordinance itself, we can certainly make sure that that's clear.
Yeah, I would prefer to do something there in the ordinance, just to sort of clarify that those folks that may be using those products, which, should be encouraged,
Right.
Would not be adversely affected.
Yes, no, I concur.
Madam Vice Chair?
Yes.
I think under tobacco product, there is a sentence here, tobacco product excludes any product that has been approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration for sale as a tobacco cessation product, as a tobacco dependence product, or for other medical purposes. So I think hopefully that
That would
kind of addresses it.
address it. Yes.
I was going to add to Commissioner Williams' point there, and he makes it very well. There may be a variety of drugs in addition, for example, nicotine patches and those sorts of things that are not necessarily derived directly from tobacco in some way, but there is intended to be a broad-based exclusion at the bottom that anything that has that U.S. FDA approval for tobacco cessation is not considered a tobacco product.
Okay, I will make a motion to approve the Union County Human Services Campus Tobacco Use Ordinance. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Okay, it was unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
That brings us to the county manager's comments.
Just one thing. Previously, I'd tried to try to get some dates scheduled with the board for some work sessions. It is important that we try to find some dates. I have learned that a date that was previously not available, December 14th, is now back on the table and back available. I would ask that you look at your schedules, let me know if that day is fine. We would look at a 5:30 start. And I was talking to Commissioner Williams earlier today, and I actually agree with him that I think we need to set a regular schedule for work sessions over the next few months. We're going to have budget, capital discussions, a lot of items that we really need to cover, and they're hard to cover in a regular meeting setting. So I'm going to also ask the board, and I'll send this out, to look at your schedules over the next few months, and let's go ahead and plan some regular work sessions for the board to meet. They can be in the afternoons, they can be in the evenings, whatever your preferred time is fine. Thank you.
Do you want one work session per month or two, or what are you looking for?
At a minimum, one. We may have to have more as we get closer to the budget, because obviously we usually spend defined time on the budget, but we certainly at least one and maybe more as we get closer to the budget season.
Okay. Commissioners' comments? I will start with Commissioner J.R. Rowland.
Happy Thanksgiving. That's all.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I would just echo those same sentiments. Obviously, we've got Thanksgiving coming up this week. Wish everybody a very happy Thanksgiving, and would urge everyone to just reflect on all that we have to be thankful for. So, thank you.
I echo those sentiments. A good practice, I think, for all of us is to build a gratitude list. And I know I'll be doing that over the next week. And I just wish everyone a very happy Thanksgiving.
Mr. Richard Hammond?
Yeah, I'll have to say this Thanksgiving, I've got a lot to be thankful for, that I'm here. And so I wish everyone a very happy Thanksgiving and a wonderful Christmas season. Thank you.
This will end our public business for the evening. I move that the board go back into closed session for the following purposes. Pursuant to General Statute 143-318.11A1 to prevent the disclosure of information that is privileged or confidential. Pursuant to General Statute 143-318.11A3 to consult with an attorney in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege. And pursuant to General Statute 143-318.11A6 to consider the qualifications, competence, performance, character, fitness, conditions of appointment, or conditions of initial employment of an individual public officer or employee or prospective public officer or employee. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Aye.